In this video, we're gonna show you how simple it is to install a Leggari Stone Kit and give your countertops that new look. So now that the primer's dry, it's still tacky. We can actually tape on our primer before it's completely dry and hard. So what we like to do is just test it, make sure it's not coming off on your fingers or gloves. It's still sticky, which is fine. It's gonna wind up drying under the tape. So it is a fast cure primer, so we're not worried about having to wait for it to be fully hard, dry, etc. So when we're taping, we wanna tape about half of the width of the tape. This is like a 2-inch, 1.8 inch tape, and we're using painter's tape. Yellow sticks really well, gonna get us a nice tight seal, and we wanna try to keep that height all the way around. All right, so once we get one layer, we're gonna come back and do another layer and try to keep it at the same height so we can get 2 layers of tape. It's gonna add a little bit more rigidity to this. So it's really fast, easy to tape. Next, we wanna really press this down nice and tight. Make sure we really seal up all that tape. We don't want the resin to bleed through it. Get your corners good. And then we're just gonna pinch in our tops here. That's gonna create a little tension. And that's how we tape for our Leggari Stone Kit. So this is basically ready for the base coat. I'll finish taping the rest of this off, and it goes really fast.
Okay, we're gonna mix up this Leggari Stone Kit for Tyler. This kit is actually very easy to mix. It consists of 5 midnight pearls. So we want lots of black, and then a gold and a white Leggari effect. So we're gonna have some ridiculous effects in this counter just with using our midnight pearl and our Leggari effects. This stuff is very potent, it goes very far. So the first thing we wanna do is we wanna give Tyler a base coat of clear to put on the countertop, and then we'll start mixing everything else up. So the first thing we wanna do is we wanna take some of our A, actually 42 ounces of A, to be exact. We're gonna pour that out. You guys are gonna love our easy pour jugs. These things are absolutely phenomenal. And then we wanna take 21 ounces of the B because it's 2 to 1. So 42 ounces of A, 21 ounces of B. You can mix it all in one container, but I like to show you how to be very exact with your measurements. So we're gonna pour the B into the A, and we're gonna mix this for about 1.5 minutes on a low to medium speed with an electric drill with the paddle wheel. I'll show you the paddle wheel here in a minute. And then we're gonna transfer it into a brand new bucket. That's to ensure that we don't have any soft spots on the counter. You don't want any soft spots. So let me take this large drill off, and I'm gonna move this up and down and scraping the sides slowly and the bottom as I move it up and down. And you want to be careful that you don't put it on a high speed and nick the sides, because some of these containers are actually pretty fragile. Okay, now we're going to transfer this into a new container. You notice we do have some stuff floating around in there because I'm using an old drill we didn't clean very well. So it's best if you use a clean drill, obviously. And when you're done with the drill, if you want to reuse it, clean it off. Now what I'm going to do is actually I can use the same stir stick. I'm just going to dump all of this epoxy into a brand new container. And what's happening is now all the mixed epoxy in the middle of the container is touching the outside where it's tough to get the drill. And now everything that I'm scraping off the sides of the first container is flowing and falling into the middle where I can now mix it. This ensures that there's no soft spots in any of the product. And now these containers and this stir stick are garbage. So I'm going to do the same thing, moving it up and down slowly for about another 20 to 30 seconds. Now it's ready to go. I'll give this to Tyler. He'll start spreading it out, and then in a couple minutes I'll start mixing up the rest of it.
All right, so we're gonna apply the base coat. Couple things I'll go over real quick. We just wanna make sure we get an even amount on all the counters. So obviously we have a wider island here than the other counters. So I don't wanna pour the same amount I pour out here on the other counters. And I'm gonna start out with smaller beads, and then I can go back and add to them. So since this is wider, I'm gonna do two thin beads down it. And then we'll do one bead down the rest of the counters. And again, we can come back and add to these. So it's good to start out smaller beads, and then we'll come back and add to them. Now what I'm looking for is I want to try to get the same thickness once it kind of levels out. So you can see there's some thinner spots, thicker spots. So now I'll just go back, get it closer to the edges. Not necessarily pour where the beads are thicker, just where they're thinned out a little bit. This one's pretty even. I'm gonna have to, I forgot to tape this up, so I will tape that up before we get going. So again, I'm just hitting these thin spots. And then we'll get a little bit back here. And if you wind up pouring too much out in one spot and it's a lot thicker, we can always scrape it back in the bucket and go pour it somewhere else where it's a little thinner. This one looks pretty good. Maybe a little more right here. But if you look, we got about 3-inch wide bead there, you know, relatively close here. So it's all pretty close everywhere. We have 2 out here. So this should be a pretty good amount everywhere. So I'll just start applying this, show you guys how to do this. So easiest way is gonna be using a squeegee. You can use a paint stick, anything that's rigid and flat. And we're just gonna kind of spread this out over the counter real quick. I'm just holding at an angle so it's leaving some epoxy behind. And the reason we do a thin coat of epoxy is so the dirty pour can flow easier, and all the counter surfaces has a thin coat of epoxy. So we don't have any surface tension. It lets the resin flow a lot better. Now I'm gonna bring it to my edges. So you can see how fast I spread that out. If you don't have a squeegee or anything, you can just roll it out. It'll just take a little longer. And now all I'm gonna do is take in a foam roller, make sure it rolls, and we're just gonna roll this out to even it all out. So when you start applying this base coat, whoever's doing the mixing, they need to start mixing all their metallics up, getting your dirty pour ready to apply. That way, because it'll take you maybe 20 minutes to do your base coat, and by then you'll have your dirty pour kit ready to go, and you'll be able to pour that out right on the counter. So you're not wasting any time. So again, just rolling it out until it's all got a good even thickness. I don't have thick spots, thin spots. And again, if you have too much on one area, just scoop some back up and pour it somewhere else where it's really thin. This is perfect. My roller's quiet. It doesn't sound sticky. Everything's got a nice even coat. So yeah, really simple process. I'll continue this on the rest of the counters, finishing the base coat. Tim's gonna start mixing up the actual dirty pour kit for me, so I can, once I'm done, I can start pouring that out right away.
While Tyler's finishing up on the base coat, I'm going to mix the rest of this Leggari Stone Kit. Now, this is one of the easier kits to do because I don't need to separate all the colors because all of our color is the same for this kit. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to take a 5-gallon bucket and we want to dump our part A into this 5-gallon bucket. Now, it's kind of nice, you can just leave them upside down like this with a big 5-gallon stir stick. And even while Tyler's doing that, we should have just had these out dumping into the bucket anyways. You can always leave that to drain for 10 to 15 minutes. One thing that I'll mention is these are nice, easy pour containers, but sometimes epoxy does get stuck in the handle if you turn it over too fast, so it's nice to just set it back up and let it drain out of this handle. Maybe set it up for like 10, 15 seconds and then tip it back over just to remove anything else from the container. And the way we know we have all of our product out is, or at least most of our product, almost all of it, is when the streams from the epoxy actually start turning into drips. You know, you're just kind of wasting your time at that point waiting for it. The part A is much thicker than the part B, so it always takes longer to deal with the A. It's important to acclimate these as well. You want to do installations right around 70 degrees. You don't want it too cold, you don't want it too hot. We really test our products right around 70 degrees for the most successful installation. Now, I'm going to put a mask on. You don't want to be breathing metallics, and if you can do this outside, it's even better. I recommend that. So you can either just turn on a shop vac and leave the head of the shop vac here, just collecting any residual dust, or go outside, wear a respirator. It's just good habit to get into anytime you're dealing with anything that has any type of dust or powder. I'm going to dump all 5 of these Midnight Pearls in this mix. Okay, once the metallics are fully submersed, now we can pour in our hardener, our part B. Now again, it's important to remember that it's a 2-to-1 epoxy. So if you happen to be splitting the kit in half, you're gonna have a lot of measuring to do. We're just mixing up the full kit for 50 square feet. Now you don't have to wait as long for the hardener to let it drip. It's a lot more fluid. So the first thing I did is I dumped the rest of the part A from the 2 containers into the bucket. I added all of the metallics, the 5 Midnight Pearls. I mixed those in, fully submersed those, and now I'm adding the hardener. And again, I just tipped it up for about 10 to 15 seconds, let it drain out of the handle. Now I'm tipping it back over, and we'll just wait for this stream to just turn into more drips. See, now it's really starting to drip. Let it drip for a few seconds, and then we'll be ready to go. I'm gonna take the drill for about a minute and a half. I'm gonna move it up and down, scraping the sides with the end of the paddle wheel, the bottom. Then after about a minute and a half, I'm gonna transfer it into a brand new bucket, scrape the sides of this, and mix again for another 30 to 45 seconds. All right, now let's transfer this into a brand new bucket. Now I already know that there's a lot of unmixed product on the side of this first bucket. So we're just gonna scrape the sides, scrape the bottom. It'll probably be a lot messier for you than than I'm making it look, just because we've been doing this for so long, but that's okay. If you spill a little bit of epoxy, don't sweat it. There's plenty of epoxy in this kit. And if you have plastic down like this, you can always pick it back up, grab a couple scrapers, pick it back up, put it in the bucket, keep mixing it, don't stress out too much. All right, got most of this out now. Now, same thing, I'm gonna mix it for another 30 to 45 seconds, move the drill up and down, and they'll be ready to go. I'll show you what to do. All right, I have the product mixed up. Now, even though I'm explaining stuff a lot and we're stopping, it just goes to show you have plenty of time to work with the product, but even though it's mixed up, you wanna still move quickly. So we're gonna set out 5 2-quart containers, or you could have 2.5 quart containers. And I'm gonna pour anywhere from 50 to 60 ounces, 50 to 63 ounces in each of these. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna take the Leggari Effects, the gold and the white. I'll show you what I'm gonna do with it. So I'm gonna shake these up really well. This does have some components in it that settle a little bit. So it's good to keep these shaken up. I'm gonna take the gold and I'm gonna disperse it between these 3. And I'm gonna take the white and I'm gonna split it between these 2. I'm just gonna drip it down the side. A little bit goes a long way. Now I can always add to it, but I don't wanna squirt it all out quite yet. I can kind of see how much I've used, about half of it. I'm just gonna mix a little bit more, and we're even gonna save some in the squirter to give to Tyler if he wants to do anything on the counter. So I've left about 1/4 of it. And then we're gonna take the white, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna put quite a bit in these 2, and I'll even save a little bit in the container. I'm just letting it drip down the side. Now guys, this is the only effect like this on the market. So again, I split the gold between these 3, left about 1/4 in there, split the white between these 2, and I left anywhere from 1/8 to a 1/4 in there, hopefully enough for Tyler to do something with. Now I'm gonna take the Midnight Pearl and I'm gonna split it between these 5 containers. What I'm gonna do with the rest of this Midnight Pearl, I'm gonna take a brand new bucket. I'm just gonna leave this upside down, and I'm just gonna let this drip out, and we'll use this. And you wanna be careful when you do that. We'll just drip the rest of the Midnight Pearl out of here, and then we'll maybe use that at the very end and create some fine black marks. So now what I wanna do is I wanna take 2 different paint sticks. I want to use one for the gold and one for the white. Just real quick, a couple times, you're just going to go through the mix. Just 2 or 3 times. Just get that stirred up just a little bit. I'm scraping the bottom a little bit. Same thing with the gold. I'm just going to move through this. Just 2 little quick swipes. Now they're ready to go. Look how beautiful these mixes are. You're gonna be blown away at what they look like when they hit the counter.
All right, so I'm gonna take a little bit of the Leggari Effects and I'm gonna kind of map out a pattern just by squeezing some of this color out. So we'll start with gold. So it's gonna give me something to kind of follow as I'm pouring this stuff out. And it's also gonna push up through the actual pores and create some really cool gold hues out in our countertop. We just wanna kind of get some all throughout the counters here. And I like to kind of, more random the better. I just kind of just be real random with it. I'm not trying to make a perfect shape or design. You always can. There's a lot of different ways that you can do these dirty pours. And obviously you don't want to run out. So at least I got some gold over here. Obviously a little bit more out here, but that's all right. And then we'll do the same thing with white. Getting all that out of there. All right, so now we can start the actual dirty pour process where we're dumping out the cups. We don't want to let these sit in longer than they have to, so we want to kind of be moving quickly. But now I have a kind of a guide. If you're not doing the Leggari Effects, you can just run a paint stick through the flood coat and you can create your design like that. But I don't have to follow this exactly. Not maybe a huge fan of that one, so I might not follow that to a T, but the rest are kind of cool. So we'll just start pouring out. And since I have 3 of the Midnight Pearl and gold, I'll do this first and then I'll incorporate the stuff with the white in it as I'm going. So we're gonna just start here and just follow this pattern. And you'll see that gold will push up through the actual resin, which is really, really cool. All right, now I want to kind of move around the counter and just keep pouring out the beads because I don't want to wind up pouring too much out in one area. I want to get it as even as I can or as close as I can to the amount of pours I do everywhere. So you can kind of see how it's pushing up on top of the actual epoxy. Really, really cool. All right, so now we'll do one of our whites. All right, there's our second bucket. You can see how the white in the mix creates some really cool effects. So I'll just keep going, kind of filling in any spots that haven't been hit. And just keep in mind, I don't want to pour a lot of product here. This is still going to level out. It'll probably wind up filling that in. There's a lot of resin out on these beads. So I want to kind of pour a little bit of ways. Like this one's probably going to wind up touching. Again, this is going to level out quite a bit. All right, so we got one with white and then one more with the gold. So we'll go with the white one now and try to get some more white out here. And again, I'm gonna pour spots, like I don't wanna pour one next to that. So we're gonna pour a smaller amount here. Try to get some of that white out here. Same thing throughout here. All right, so we'll jump over to the rest of the counters. And again, I'm just trying to fill in the really wide open spots that don't have any pores out. Get a little back here. Again, go really thin where it's almost touching, and then I can pour a wider bead out where it's kind of opened up more. All right, so I got the last bucket, so I want to be a little more precise. Obviously pouring in these wider spots. A lot of these areas are going to wind up touching and filling in, so I'm not really worried about those. So we're just going to go around and hit these wider open areas. All right guys, so I'm just taking the leftover that was in the buckets, dumping them into one, and then we'll go fill in any other spots. Again, just doesn't take a lot in some of these areas because this is still self-leveling. It's gonna fill in. I'm just looking for bigger gaps or anything that doesn't look filled. And again, it's still thick here. It's just the clear from the base coat. So we'll finish this off and then I'll show you how to blend some of these veins in. It's gonna look really cool when we're done. All right, so what I'm gonna do is just run my finger. Obviously we have some patterns, some veins, stuff like that. I'm gonna just run and blend this gold in just a tad to give it a more natural look. Doesn't take much, but notice how I'm following the actual pattern that I poured it out. And you can really take any vein or any spot where the colors are meeting and just kind of run your hands through it. It'll create a really cool, more natural look. So now look at that look. Just looks a lot more natural, kind of like a fracture vein in real stone. That's kind of what we're looking for here with these Leggari Stone Kits. Really beautiful. Same thing with the white. We're just kind of breaking that pattern up of just pouring it out. And you can't really mess this up. It doesn't matter where you blend it, how much you blend it. And I'm also looking for any spots that are missing epoxy. I'll just spread that around. Like right here, we don't really have any resin there. You can usually always get a little more out of your containers. It's slowly coming. All right, so I'm just gonna continue that, blending some of these in, and just always kind of follow whatever pattern that you have out here. I don't want to just start going back and forth. Notice how I'm following some of these veins and just blending it in. And I like to kind of hit it real quick and then let it level out, make sure I like it, because I can always blend it a little more, but I can't really take it away if I blended it too much. So I noticed just from kind of blending some of this, it's really thin back there, so I'll do the same thing. Just take one of these containers and just let it drip out of there. And we'll kind of push that up in there. All right, so before I spray it, I want to just double check, make sure I don't have any missed spots or there's opened up areas. Everything looks kind of filled in. So what I got here is just our Midnight Pearl all by itself. And there's a lot of black out here. This is more of a subtle kit. Really cool though. But I'll still kind of run some of these lines. Since I have a lot of patterns out here to follow, I'll just start following one. Trying to get it right next to that gold. And I'll just kind of add a couple of these throughout the top, just in random spots. All right guys, so another huge benefit of our resin, you don't have to torch to pop bubbles. This thing will pop bubbles all by itself. It'll be releasing air throughout the curing process. Really cool product for that. But we want to add a couple more effects. So we're going to take 91% isopropyl alcohol just in a spray bottle, and we're going to spritz the surface. And what I mean by spritz is we're going to barely pull the trigger so we get a bunch of little drops everywhere. And that's going to create a lot of dispersing effects on our surface and give a really cool effect. If you guys don't want those cells or more of that dispersing look, just don't spray it. If you do have like bubbles or anything that you need to get rid of, the only reason you'll ever have those is if you take too long to pour the resin out. It starts to set up, the bubbles can't be released through the resin and pop. So that's really the only time you'll ever get bubbles, is if you're taking too long, it's starting to heat up, it starts getting sticky. If you run into that, just mist the surface with either isopropyl or denatured alcohol, and that will pop those bubbles. So we don't ever torch our resins, never have to, and we love that about it. So what I'm gonna do is just spritz the surface real quick, and you'll see it'll immediately start bringing out a lot more depth to it. It's gonna really create some cool effects where our Leggari effect pigments are at. All right guys, so that's the isopropyl, real simple. If you're not in a ventilated area, obviously wear a mask. And a lot of these cells and spots are gonna go away where there's no color, okay? So this is still gonna be leveling out. It's gonna marbleize all on its own. It's gonna look completely different in about 20 minutes. And then when we pull this tape, it's gonna really make these counters pop. It's gonna look like a natural slab of stone. The best thing to check for the perfect time to pull your edges, it can really vary from an hour to 2 hours, 2.5 hours if you're in cold temps. We are in a colder warehouse, so it does take us a little longer. But the easiest way is, you'll see when I pull this back, it's gonna start to flow really, really fast. See how it's just moving down that counter super fast, almost to the top of the tape already? That's too soon. So what's gonna happen if I pull that right now, it's gonna wanna pull a lot of that resin from the top, and it's gonna mess up our design. So we wanna let this set up a little. We wanna be able to pull that tape back and just have that barely move at all. And then that's about the perfect time. Now, if you're going over 4-inch edges, 3.5-inch edges, some thick edges, you're gonna wanna keep in mind that you're gonna wanna pull that a little earlier so the resin has more time to flow to the bottom. But before I pull it, I'll show you about what you're looking for, and it's real simple. You just want that resin to just start to flow really, really slow when you bend that tape back. So we're gonna give this probably an hour, and we'll come back and check the tape again. So since we did the flood coat and clear, sometimes you'll get that flood coat once we do our beads and the dirty pour effect, the technique. It's gonna push that clear up to the surface and can create a bunch of micro bubbles, which can look really cool, almost like fracture spots in the actual epoxy. If you guys don't like that look, simple way to get rid of it is just take denatured alcohol, mist the surface, and that's gonna release all those micro bubbles that were pushed up in that clear first coat that we put down. So I'm gonna mist the surface. It's gonna release all those bubbles and get rid of that look. Again, if you like it, simply top coat it the next day, and that will stay in the counter and create a really cool, unique look. All right, so I'm gonna pull the tape. I'll show you what you kind of are looking for before you pull it. Again, I showed you before, it was moving down really fast. Let's try right here. So I'm pulling that back. See how it's almost sagging? It's just barely moving. I don't know if you can pick it up, but it is just barely moving. That's about the perfect time to pull it. So we're gonna start pulling this. We'll just tear it. And by the time we get back to that end of the tape, it'll probably be halfway down the counter. Notice how it's not pulling the primer off. And we went on the primer. We put the tape on the primer before it was even completely tack free. So really cool products. As you can see, it's slowly going down and it'll get there, don't worry. So now we'll finish the rest. And you'll have some spots that are thicker, is gonna flow a little faster. I'll kind of show you once I'm done pulling all the tape what we want to do next. All right, so we can hear it dripping. If you look over here, how's that edge look? Yeah, so it's almost to the bottom. We still have a lot of surface tension here. So what we're gonna do is just take our glove in hand and we're just gonna blend in this whole edge. That way it gets all coated with epoxy, and that's gonna let it flow nice and evenly without any drips or missed spots. And don't worry about messing up colors or designs, because it's still gonna pull. Like you'll see in about 5-10 minutes, that vein will be down the edge, so it's gonna look really, really cool. We just wanna make sure everything gets coated. There's no missed spots of resin on the faces. Guys, look, so I'll just point this out. I don't need to brush this in. This whole edge is pretty much coated. I'm just gonna run on the bottom edge just to even out that bottom edge so it kind of drips and flows over evenly. There's no point in me rubbing that in. This whole edge is almost coated, so I don't need to rub that in. It looks really, really good. All right, so tape's pulled. These edges are gonna drip for another hour, maybe even 2 hours. Totally depends on your temperature. Best way to scrape them is when it's fluid like this. We'll use a paint stick, and when it starts to set up, we want to use something flat and skinny and kind of just shave off that bottom edge, because we don't want it to build up on a thick, wide paint stick and push some back on the edge. So I'll show you that in a second. Another thing, when you're doing dispersing effects, any denatured, anything like that, you might get some divots or craters or anything. If you see those in your top, just pat those in with your finger. Don't assume it's going to level out. Always help level those out. And then the last thing, you can always kind of look over your top, see if you have any debris in it. We have like a hair right here. I'll kind of show you how I would get it out. So we can just pick this out. See that hair? Again, if you're top coating, which you should be if you're doing Leggari Effects, spray paints, anything like that, debris and stuff doesn't really matter. We can always lightly sand it, and the top coat's gonna hide all that. So for scraping drips, we'll just start out with the paint stick. Again, since it's nice and fluid, and we'll just start scraping these drips. This is obviously gonna keep dripping. And like I said, when it gets sticky, it's not as dripping as much. We wanna use something skinny, like a putty knife, and just kind of cut that off the edge. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it. Again, if you don't scrape your drips, you're gonna have to sand those the next day. You can sand those with 80 grit, 100 grit sandpaper, but it's a lot easier if you just spend the time, scrape those drips, get it nice and flat, and it will set up enough to where it doesn't drip anymore. We're about to show you how beautiful these turned out. You saw how simple it was. Order your kit today and you can do this in your space.